Hi, so as I noted last week, I'm going to talk about another raiding related one. This isn't to do with rosters though, this is to do with the nature of the raids themselves. Now of course in WoD we've had 4 different difficulties, so I'm sort of going to go through a little bit on each one. We might as well take the elephant out of the room out right away. LFR, looking for raid. Now as a mythic raider, people might expect me to be opposed to LFR, but I'm actually not. There are a number who are. Before WoD, there were 2 main arguments that I would level at LFR though. The first was that it discouraged people from doing organised raiding. This is before basically you could get exactly the same gear from LFR. It was just lower item level, but it was exactly the same things. The trinkets did the same things, your tier sets did the same things, everything did the same. And the fact that it was lower item level really didn't matter if you weren't going to be doing the harder content anyway. It was still plenty good enough for doing anything else that you might want to do with it. And an awful lot of inexperienced players maybe have only just started, thought that it was raiding anyway. They just thought that was part of the end game. And that might sound surprising, but I remember joining a new guild and I transferred an alt across. But before I joined up with a new guild on it, you know, you used to get all these spams for guild invites, which has lessened now that it's not a source of gold for the people who operate these things. So I joined one of them and got talking about raiding, and they really didn't think there was any difference between any of the modes of raiding. They just didn't think there was any difference at all. They just thought stuff hit harder in the higher level. They literally thought there was no difference between LFR and heroic as it was at the time. And it was pretty grim. Now I remember a particular discussion about people going, "Oh, we're going to go to this raid tonight," and there was someone there who'd only actually just joined the guild themselves. They'd only just got to level cap. They really didn't know much of what was going on in World of Warcraft. And I asked him just to see what he thought was going on. "Oh, what sort of raid are you going to then? You going?" Because we'd been talking about LFR and heroic, and he thought he was going to a heroic raid. It wasn't even normal raid. It was LFR that this person was going to be going to. So, and you always thought, well, LFR would be a stepping stone to proper raiding. People would, you know, play the game, learn their trade in LFR, and then step up to organised raid. Of course, it never worked out like that, simply because you didn't have to do anything in LFR. You didn't learn any skills because there was no one teaching you, because, you know, you're in a situation where the fight is probably going to go anyway. And usually if there's someone not doing very well, the first thought of the raid is to kick them anyway, rather than just to educate them. It's not in anyone's interest to put themselves out to help someone else, because you're never going to see them again, in all likelihood. And then there was another player who I could charitably call a more experienced player in this guild. I think a more accurate term would be gobshite, who was really basically saying there is no difference between LFR and heroic, which is what we'd call mythic now. And I was trying to say, what you on about? Why don't you do heroic then? Oh, well, I ain't got the gear. As if heroic raiders were, you know, as if Blizzard decides who's going to be a heroic raider, who's going to be an LFR raider, and just allocates gear accordingly. It's like, we all started off with the same gear, mate. At level 1, we all had that crap shirt and a wooden club. I don't know. But anyway, that ignorance, I thought, was depriving us potentially effective raiders. You know, a lot of people that I came across who were raiding heroic started raiding, you know, maybe it was in vanilla, maybe it was TBC, maybe it was Wrath, maybe it was even Cataclysm. Not that many who started in MOP. There were a few, very few. So I do think LFR improved for the better by having different gears. Like, okay, you're going to do LFR, you're not going to get tier gear. You're not going to get the trinkets that the other raiders will get. You're not going to get anything that the other raiders will get. You will get some gear. You will get some armor that has set bonuses on it, just basic ones. And, you know, you will get trinkets, but they're just basic ones. They don't do anything clever. Again, just and they also completely took the teeth out of the fights as well, just to make everyone under have no illusions that this was not raiding. There were a few fights where You might have wanted your tanks to know what they were doing, otherwise it could get sticky, like in Perrot and Margok, for example. But by and large, if no one knew what they were doing, the bosses would generally still fall over. Every now and then they might not, but generally they would still fall over. So no one could be under any illusions that this was endgame. Now, the second criticism I levelled at LFR, which sort of still exists, is that you need greater ranges of item level to accommodate the extra mode. Back then there were initially 3 modes, and then they brought Flexi in. So we've now got the 4 modes as it was at the end of MOP. And what that means is now the difference between the item level you will reach level cap in and the best geared players is huge. It's absolutely monstrous. Which means, again, it's more difficult to catch up. And there's so much disparity between the different players as well when you're out in the world doing things like that as well. Okay, you expect people in top-end raid gear to have a much easier time. You would have in any expansion had an easier time. But just the difference in power that you have when you're like 725, 730 item level compared with someone who's just started is enormous, and that doesn't look set to change really. That is still a problem, and potentially compounded by the fact that you have these different levels of item level even within the same raid tier. Because in Hellfire Citadel we've got 4 different levels of item level as well. Yes, they overlap across several difficulties, but at the mythic end, it goes right up to a point which is probably higher than it needs to do. Quite frankly, it goes up to 735, and you only need 730 item level to defeat the bosses, because you're not going to get, well, unless you get some from your cache, you're not going to get 735 item level gear unless you get Warforged, unless you've killed Archimond, at which point you've killed everything anyway. So we didn't need things to be 735 item level. That is just to reward people who've killed Archimond and get yourself even better gear for what? I don't know, because we're leveling next. We don't need it. But that aside, I do think LFR plays a role. I do think it should stay in. It provides PvE content for casual players who don't want to either pug, and fair enough on that one, an actual raid, or to commit to a day or two in a raiding guild. You have to remember that LFR only appeared at the end of Cataclysm. It's in the last tier of Cataclysm. They've made changes in MOP. LFR was different in MOP than it was when it first came out for Dragon Soul. They made improvements there. They made even more changes in WoD. So who's to say it's not going to be further refined in Legion? So some of the things that people have a problem with LFR, who's to say that won't be addressed? So I do think when people sort of complain about anything really, they probably should have a backup idea. You have to recognise what LFR is there for, and it's for people who don't want to commit to raiding. And you have to, and because it awards different gear now, there is no impetus for raiders to have to go into LFR at all. There's no need for it. So again, another argument was always, oh well, I've got to be forced to run several modes of the same raid. No, you don't, because you don't have to do it. I have never had to do LFR Hellfire Citadel on my main at all, ever. We did heroic and we did some normal in the first couple of weeks so that we could get the tier gear and hopefully some trinkets. You carry on doing the heroic. If you're into mythic raiding, you carry on doing heroic to get Archimon, to get the ring upgrade. But even then, you're not clearing the whole thing in most cases. You're just clearing the last few bosses, and then you're just doing your normal your mythic progress if you're still on mythic progress, and that's really all there is to it. I would like, though, to see a more obvious push to getting players to progress from LFR into actual raiding. I would like people to do raid, the ones who aren't into PvP, that is. If you're into PvE, I would like it. And the gear's different now, but are LFR players really aware? Again, those same players that I encountered that thought LFR was raiding, is there anything really telling them it's not if they're not trying out the other things? Not really. Not really. Like, I think, like, story time, if I cast my mind back to when I first started playing World of Warcraft, and in 2005, and you'd be congregating around Ironforge. And I remember very distinctly, I mean, I was never going to want to play PvP in that game. It was always going to be PvE. But I was a new level 16. You're congregating in Ironforge. And I remember someone getting elevated to the rank of Grand Marshal, and there they were, posing in Ironforge with all their armour and weapons and the mount and all the rest of it. Called Cheeky the Rogue. And everyone suddenly wanted to do PvP because they looked at his gear, thought, oh, it's amazing. It was like, you know, tier 2 quality gear at a time when people were still, or people who were raiding were still slogging their way through Molten Core. And Blackwing Lair was just out, I think. And yeah, everyone wanted to do it because they just thought to themselves, well, if you do raiding, there's only so much loot drops off a boss. I mean, it's much less than it is now. Only so much loot drops off a boss, and there's like, you know, 40 people there. You're not likely to get very much. Whereas PvP, you all do it together as a team, and you're all getting the honour, so you can all get the gear, and it's not, you're not competing against each other. And people just went on to that. And then later on, I remember towards the end of 2005, as the raid guilds, you know, as more raid guilds got further in, and it became obvious that raiders were getting themselves fully decked out in epics. And you always went to Ironforge because that's where the auction house. If you're Alliance, okay, Orgrimmar. I don't know where it was for Horde. I'm guessing wherever the auction house was. But the point is that then what people start to see is they found out that they weren't getting epic gear from doing PvP. A few were. Most weren't. And then they looked at raiders and thought, well, hang on, everyone's getting epic gear now. So they all switched, and we suddenly had a huge influx, on my server at least, I don't know what it's like on other servers, a huge influx of people wanting to raid. Old PvPers applying to our guilds and things like that. And the reason they became aware of this is because they were inspecting people in Ironforge and looking at their gear. That facility, it doesn't happen anymore. I mean, where are they going to inspect you? I'm in my garrison all the time, so as many other people. You've got a few people, I would think the mainly the people hanging out in Warspear or I can't even remember what the Alliance one's called now. I'll be playing Alliance most of this expansion because I don't even care. I'm Ashran anyway, near Ashran. Probably PvP players. They're just waiting for the queue for Ashran, aren't they? And just sitting around because they can't be asked to do anything else. Primarily because there's nothing actually to do. So yeah, there isn't this hub where everyone congregates and you can inspect other people and see what the score is. So I just don't think that aspect of it sort of works anymore. So they do need to think of some way of giving people a push to say, look, you know, LFR sort of exists, but in actual fact, what you want to aspire to is actual raiding. And it wasn't like when Vanilla came out as well, it was normal just to raid multiple nights a week, like at least 5 nights a week. Now, 5 nights a week is the maximum you'll have to raid now, unless, of course, you're in one of the, you know, world rank chasing guilds, the ones at the very top, who will raid 20 hours a day while content's alive for a few weeks. But for most guilds, even mythic guilds, between 3 and 5 nights, maybe 2 days if you're a weekend guild, in which it's usually more hours per session. So it works out roughly the same number of hours. So 5 is the absolute maximum a raiding guild now will raid, and most do 3 or 4. But even, you know, for some people, even 3 might be too much, you know, if it's not your main game. But there have been plenty of guilds that will obviously not be pushing into Mythic, but they can do normal and Heroic, will do 1 night a week. I mean, there's 1 night a week guilds, there's 2 night a week guilds. There's everything to cater for anyone. I mean, you're not going to tell me that people that play this game any length of time cannot commit to 1 night a week for a few hours. Of course they can. I think it is just the fact that they think to themselves, well, hang on a minute, we're going to do this boss as a guild and we're going to wipe on it and we're going to keep wiping on it. We might wipe a whole night on 1 boss. Or I can just do LFR, maybe I'll wipe every now and then and I'll get loot. And they think they'll get loot at faster rates than if they did it as an organised guild as well. Which I'm not entirely sure is true, by the way. But it's possible, maybe it is. But that, I think that, you know, that mentality is absolutely it. And I think that is why people say that the LFR should go. And I can sort of see that. People have other reasons as well, of course. But I think you still need it, though. Because it's like, People get to level cap now, what are they going to do? You can't expect I'm thinking primarily of new players. Because never mind what the subs are, it's always, I mean, only Blizzard will know how many players now have and how long they've been playing. I think, you know, when it says we lost so many subs, we always lose far more than that, really. It's just the net, that's the net loss of subs. Because new players will be joining all the time. And when they get to level cap, we need them to do things. But they obviously can't just go to raiding. They will do badly. And they will, in all likelihood, end up in a guild that hasn't got the patience to train them up. So, so there needs to be something that they can do that is PvE related. But they also need to be told in no uncertain terms, actually what you want to do is raiding. And one possibility might well be that we go back to a time when maybe epic gear is epic gear. Yeah, it's still gonna, it's never gonna, I'm not suggesting it's ever gonna be as rare as it was back when the game started, but maybe if you only got epic gear from raiding, or you organise PvP for PvP gear, which isn't going to exist anymore, that might be something, all right? So that you only get blue gear from dungeons, but you'll also only get blue quality gear from LFR. And although it might have an item level that's higher than some epic gear from an earlier tier in that expansion, the fact that it is blue, and it's like saying to play, and you can't, let's say you can't craft any epics either, unless they were stunningly difficult to do and needed loads of resources. But let's say epic gear was stuff you got from organised endgame, whether it be PvP or PvE. Maybe that would be a way to get that aspiration back. Because it's no good looking at players anymore, because we've all got transmog. That doesn't work. I know the art department, I feel sorry for them, worked very hard on making sure that the different modes of gear this expansion were, rather than just recolours, were actually different. You got the shoulders doing crazy stuff and things like that in the mythic gear. No, we've all got transmog. We've got nicer sets. You made nicer sets several expansions ago, and that's what people use. Or they will make up their own transmog, their own unique transmog from other bits and pieces around. But very few, I'm not saying no one, because some do, but very few people actually use the modern artwork as is on their gear. They use sets, transmog sets. So that hasn't worked. So maybe, yeah, make everything blue unless you've actually done organised endgame stuff. Another thing they might do is bite the bullet, and maybe on LFR you don't get the last boss. I mean, think about how the way the wings have been organised. The last boss has always been a raid on its own, hasn't it, in LFR? You know, so that's Imperator, Blackhand and Archimond have always been on their own. I think, actually, was Archimond on it, or was it with Manos? I'm not sure. I haven't done the LFR and Hellfire Citadel the last couple of wings, so I'm not sure about that. But maybe what they could do is just cancel that wing. Just don't have the end boss. So it's like if you want to kill the end boss, you're going to have to go and raid. But anyway, that's LFR. That's just my thoughts. Obviously, I know it's a very divisive subject and people have very different views. And I'm not saying that any of the things I've said are absolute fact. They are entirely my opinions. But they are my opinions, at any rate. I mean, on to organised raiding. I mean, another thing people have argued is that there shouldn't be normal and heroic, as they cater to the same group. But, you know, to my mind, that's sort of the point. A normal mode raid group will eventually finish, and they will kill Archimond in Hellfire Citadel. And then they've got a long lead into the next expansion. And even if you take it, it's a bizarre thing now because we have this long run up to the next expansion. But even if you did normal Blackhand, there would still be a long time before Hellfire Citadel was going to come out. So what do you do? So I think they need the two modes there for some progression. You can't just go into Mythic now, because in Heroic you can have anything between 10 and 30 players. This is the whole point of it. It's supposed to be inclusive. So it's like you've got your raid group, and one night you have 17 people online. As long as the balance is alright of DPS, tank and healer, then away you go. The next night you might have 12. Again, as long as you've got this reasonable balance, you can still go. Next night you might have 25. Again, it's not a problem. long as it's between 10 and 30. Whereas with Mythic, it's a totally different way of organising. It's a totally different attitude, because you've got to have exactly 20. Okay, you could go in with fewer, but you're probably not going to do very well. But you need exactly 20, which basically means if you have fewer than 20 turn up, you are going nowhere. You also usually need a much stricter balance of classes as well, not just any old, you know, maybe 14 DPS, 2 tanks, and 4 healers for most fights. You know, maybe the balance, you know, if most of like 10 of those are melee on certain fights, you're going to be in trouble. So you don't just need 20, you need, like, I'm not going to say a specific 20, but it's a little bit stricter on what you can get away with. And let's say you have more than 20 turn up, some are benched. So there is to it. Some of you sitting on the bench. Can you wait around, please, in case we need to bring you in? This is a totally alien concept to people now who've been raiding normal and heroic, who, if they're available, they're in. All there is to it, they're in. So this is a very alien concept. And some of the players in such a guild will be well up for the Mythic Challenge, and they will have the right mentality for it. And some of them won't. Some of them will not like it. So you're going to have a load of aggro, really, in your guild. Plus, the officers have got to do more work as well. It's a lot harder to organise not only Mythic tactics, but the Mythic rosters than it is a heroic one. So I think you do need the separate difficulties there. And in fact, really, they perhaps ought to make each one a little bit more difficult, not too difficult. You want to make it accessible. You don't actually want people going in and getting their asses kicked on a first night of normal. You want people to be able to kill a few bosses, at least on normal. But maybe it could be tuned just a little bit tighter, because there are guilds who've already obviously killed heroic and will not be going into Mythic. Well, what are they going to do now? Farm it for a bit more? Why? And even if they do, they're not going to farm it for this long, because that's the point, really. I mean, in Mythic, you'll want to farm it a bit for mounts. Yeah. Now, at this point, there's another thing I probably should get out of the way. And people sort of say, well, the answer to this is make Mythic flexible. You've seen this so much on forums, and it misses the point of what Mythic is completely. You cannot make it flexible, because it means you can't tune the fight. Heroic and normal are not well tuned. That's why they are so easy for Mythic raid guilds. Because if you think about it, let's just take heroic on its own. There's 21 levels of difficulty for heroic, because there are 21 sort of numbers you can have. You can have 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 people, all the way up to 30 people. So that's 21 levels of difficulty. And of course, the tuning needs such margins for error that if you take in an optimal group, and there is always an optimal group, group size and composition, you will just kick the shit out of all those fights. You can't have that situation in Mythic. You cannot allow that situation, because very organised guilds and skilled players will just defeat it too easily. It'll be too quick. You know, it's all right, the most serious and hardcore raiders finishing content in a couple, 2 or 3 weeks. It's not all right for the next 200, 300 ranked player guilds as well doing the same thing, which is exactly what would happen. So that doesn't work. There's, you know, the other argument that's used is, okay, we'll go back to 2 raid sizes because people like that. Again, the reason why the 1 raid size in Blizzard did explain this, they really did explain this, is because it allows them to think, oh, I've got a really good idea for a mechanic, and put it in. Before they couldn't, because they thought, oh, I've got a really good idea for a mechanic, and someone would go, ah, well, hang on a minute, that would need that particular class. Well, 10-man guilds might not have it. Go on. Now, granted, it's not ideal. You know, there's a double-edged sword that, because what you do is by putting those mechanics in, you create a situation where you need a particular class, maybe even 2 of a particular class, and a particular spec potentially. So like wanting priests for mind control on blast furnace and things like that. and non-shield tanks for Iron Maidens and Blackhand, like I described last week, which does disadvantage certain guilds, I think, a little unfairly, but that's because of the size, I think, of the raid sizes, rather than the fact that there's one raid size. But yeah, you absolutely don't want to be clipping developers' wings and saying, sorry, you can't have that mechanic because, you know, some guilds might not have it, or a lot of guilds might not have it, because there are so many 10-man guilds. So, and that's how you end up with Dark Animus. It's someone desperately trying to think of a unique mechanic and a unique fight with so many constraints. So we really don't need to go back to that. And, you know, okay, as I say, we get into a situation with what they do now where some classes will just be really, really powerful, and some classes will be utterly dispensable. So even if they're a really good player, really reliable player, you'll be basically saying, okay, try you out, but you won't be able to compete with some others, potentially. I mean, you will notice there are players of every class and spec who achieve, like, top 20 world ranks. But there are some that are notably absent, say, from top 10s, which means that, you know, they can also be absent from ones lower down as well. So given that guilds essentially will either have to set up themselves, they'll have to decide what sort of guild they're going to be. They're either going to have to set up themselves for heroic raiding, which basically means flexi, which means as long as you maintain a reasonable core of tanks and healers, that you can sort of take what DPS you want, or they have to set up for mythic, in which case you need a tighter roster, because you don't want too many in the roster, because then you know, not only could you have too many people benched, but you're also spreading your gear out too thin if you're rotating. And if you're rotating as well, especially on progress, I mean, that's not conducive to good progress, because people are constantly coming in and out, and that's not, you want a stable team to beat bosses, especially the harder bosses. So, but they do have to decide which of those models they're going to go for. It's not easy to transition from one to the other. I'm not saying it's impossible. Some people make out that it's harder than it actually is, but it is hard and it would take work. So the current model is certainly not ideal. But as I say, and it's not going to be solved just by, I mentioned, tuning normal and heroic a bit harder, just getting a bit harder, just to make it last a bit longer. But I think people's patience, the sort of people who are going to be into that mode anyway, will have limited patience, and they will probably only want to devote a few months anyway to the progress. And if it's not done after those few months, even if there is still something to be done, they'll probably just say, do you know what, I can't be bothered. Because although with LFR you're getting different gear and all the rest of it, well, you're getting the same gear in Mythic as you do in normal, for example. It's just different names and lower item level. But, you know, and normal is much easier. So, again, people might say to themselves, well, do we really need to do Heroic Archimond? And I know with the patch announcement this week, there is now a little bit of a reason, because you can get a quest item that will lead you to that mount. But again, are people all that bothered about it? Maybe they prefer just to save up the gold and get themselves boosted for it. Or maybe just do without it at all. The other thing could be, is with Heroic mode, maybe just instead of being essentially a more... It's essentially the same as normal, almost exclusively, with the exception that, you know, stuff hits harder, you have to hit harder, and heal harder, and take more damage. But maybe there should be, just like in the Mythic, you've got extra mechanics, and of course more tightly tuned. Maybe Heroic, you can't more tightly tune it more tightly, because again you've got this flex thing in there, which means they have to create this margin. But maybe some extra mechanics in there just to give it a bit more spice, to make it a bit different. Could be a thing, because at the moment I can well understand people on Heroic getting really cheesed off, wiping on Heroic Archimond like night after night if they're doing that, when they're killing it on normal, and it's the same fight. There's no difference. They're just having a smaller margin for error because it's doing more damage, and they're just waiting until their gear's up to the point where they will be able to do it as easily as they could have done normal the first time they killed that. And that's a bit boring, really. So I can well sympathise with that. Another barrier to this, I think, is that normal mode, because normal mode is so commonly done as cross-realm, pugs, and these sort of groups tend not to stick around for long if there's wipes in the offing. In many ways now, these are like the new LFR doing a normal mode pug. They're people who want on-demand raids, because you can queue up at pretty much when you're available, and you can probably get into one at some point. As long as you've got 20 item level more than the gear drops, and as long as you've got your cutting edge achievement, because they seem to ask for all sorts of silly things these days. But if you can wangle yourself into a group, so there are groups there to get yourselves in. They're not interested in progression, they just want to kill bosses. They're only interested in the loot. They're not interested in other players. They certainly won't pass on items for other players, hence personal loot, again another good feature. And they're really trying to push this, and they will again in Legion. They've already said they want to push it even more to make it the standard loot method for non-guild groups at least. But the attitude of the players in this, even though you can call normal organised raiding, it is organised raiding, people do it in guilds, it takes tactics and it takes some discussion and things like that. And that's why even in a pug you use voice comms. There's coordination needed, you need a raid leader. So none of this exists in LFR, so it's definitely organised raiding. But it's... people will not stand wiping on it, not multiple times. So the attitude, I find, is no different to the LFR attitude. There is no common purpose at all, because these people will join another pug the following week. It'll probably be two totally different people. Yes, occasionally you get into a group and you think, oh, this is a nice group, and you find out if they do it regularly, and if they do, try and join with them. So sure, and I'm sure that there are people who have found guilds by doing this sort of thing as well. So I'm not knocking this, but again, it's just this, you know, the reason you got rid of the gear for LFR, get rid of the tier gear, get rid of the nice trinkets and the nice weapons, was so that these people have a reason. You're telling them this is not organised raiding, this is just something. Whereas the people can get the tier gear and they can get those trinkets doing pugs, and which is no different to LFR, really. It takes a bit more work, and you have to use voice comms. But again, you know, you're not willing to wipe all night on one boss in a normal pug. No one would do that. They would make their excuses and leave. Or even just not make their excuses. They'd just say, oh, do you know what, I've had enough of this, I'm off. See ya. And with raiding, like, the big question for me is, does the raiding model change to meet the changing needs of the modern gamer? Or does the behaviour of the modern gamer change because Blizzard has changed the raiding model? You know, which came first? And the concern for me is that with the intended short-term expansions, Blizzard won't really have time. If something is going a bit wrong, not quite according to plan, they won't really have time to do anything other than a knee-jerk reaction, which no one would want, but you can see how this would easily happen. I mean, I remember I was looking at MMO Champion forums. It's always worth a good look at those. You do get some quite interesting posts on there, as well as the usual. I mean, it's a forum at the end of the day, you get a load of rubbish on there as well. And there was a post entitled, Will Mythic 20-Man Stand the Test of Time? Which I've not contributed to, but I read the first post. I knew what to expect on it. There was no surprises at all. I knew exactly, just from the title, what this was about. It was a heroic mode raider who'd completed stuff on heroic mode in their guild and wanted to do mythic. And or I'm not sure if they'd completed it now or were going to, and they were just thinking ahead and knowing they're going to have completed heroic Archimond well before Legion comes out, but they still want to raid. They're raider, you know, and I applaud that attitude. But they see mythic as a barrier, and they see it as Blizzard's fault. Whereas in actual fact, I'm not sure there is such thing as a heroic guild that can't do mythic if it doesn't want to. Now, you'll have to bear me out on that, because there'll be loads of people going, oh, well, yes, we can't because we haven't got the players and blah, blah, blah. No, you haven't got the players. But that doesn't mean to say you can't get them. Now, the mentality, like I said before, for mythic raiding is totally different. And there will be some players in a heroic raiding guild that have got the right mentality for mythic. And it doesn't mean to say you have to leave that guild to join a mythic guild. I'm not suggesting that. Although, given that I do think there are more mythic guilds than can accommodate all the mythic raiders, it's why so many mythic guilds are failing, because it's very hard to recruit. even if your world rank's quite high, it's very hard to recruit. And if it's not, even like, you'd think like world 300, something like that, yeah, they can still recruit, but it's even harder then. And that's still quite high. You know, there are mythic raiders in like the top 2,000. God knows what it's like for them. But it is a different attitude, because you will have players in your raid guild that just have the heroic mentality. They want to be in on that raid, whether they're good enough or not. They don't want to compete for their place. They certainly don't want to sit out and wait to have to come in if they're not good enough. They don't want to do any of those things. And you know, and you might want to raid with those people. We're not saying that they're bad for this, but then I look at this. You look at any server, any realm, and you can see quite a lot of 13 out of 13 heroic guilds, 13 out of 13 heroic, but without having done any mythic. So let's say there's a decent core of players in that guild who want to do mythic. Why not get together with another guild for that? I'm not talking about a merger. You carry on doing your heroic mode on whichever night that is, and then you say to the more serious members of another guild, with which maybe someone's friendly, have we got enough players between us to put another couple of nights on for the more serious players and do some mythic? You know, have we got 2 good tanks? Have we got, you know, 4 or 5 good healers across a nice range of abilities? Have we got a nice mix of DPS classes? You know, and could we organise this together on a couple of nights a week? How many people actually try doing that? And I don't think it's that many. And the reason is because I think from the point of officers, that would require work. And I think that some officers would just rather blame Blizzard and ask for, you know, oh, well, why don't you just give us 10-man mythic? As if that's going to solve all the problems. And it doesn't at all. It just creates more problems. So you know, you get this resentment to mythic because you see it as a barrier. But it's an entirely artificial barrier. There are ways to do it. It is harder to do it that way. But that's the whole point of mythic. It's supposed to be difficult. Not just the encounters, but organising yourself for it is supposed to be difficult. That's why you have officers. That's why they exist, to organise these things, to put the time in. No one's putting a gun to their head and forcing them to do it. If they don't want to do it, step down, let someone else do it. But that's what they exist for. They have to put the work in, and if they want those rewards, then that'll come. And if you're in a guild, for example, a heroic guild, and the officers aren't doing this, maybe you take it upon yourself to suggest it and say, well, you know, we'll approach a guild and see if they're willing. But the other aspect of it, the actual question itself, because I mean that was what I thought straight away, and I was absolutely confirmed right when I saw, will mythic 20-man stand the test of time? The other thought in my head was instantly, well, no, of course it won't. Of course it won't. And it's nothing to do with whether it's successful. I mean, this was a loaded question, of course, because what they're really saying is, I want you to put 10-man mythic in because you're creating a barrier by having it as 20-man. Whereas it will never stand the test of time because no raiding model does. Because with every expansion, Blizzard have to change the way the game works. There's certain core elements that sort of still make it World of Warcraft, but they have to change something because otherwise it's a content patch. And every single expansion has changed the landscape of raiding. We went from vanilla to TBC. We went from 40-man raiding to 25. Big change in TBC. Then what did we have in Wrath? Then they brought out 10-man and 25-man versions of the same raid. The 10-man version, it was not parity, that was an easier version, but it was 10-man version of the same raid with the same raid bosses, dropping the same type of loot, but just not as good. They also introduced hard modes, and they, you know, tweaked the mechanism for hard mode, and it's developed over time to what it is now. A lot of people, of course, prefer the first iteration from Ulduar. But, you know, big changes in Wrath for the raiding model. Then, what do we have? Cataclysm brought in LFR. Again, another game changer on the raiding scene. They attempted parity at this point with 10 and 25 man. They buggered about with raid lockouts. And then came MOP, where they achieved a much more realistic parity between 10 and 25 man. They further refined looking for raid with the personal loot. Okay, so you weren't all rolling on it and getting your mates to roll on it to give it to someone else, which is unfair on someone just in that on their own. You also had the concept in Throne of Thunder of getting a oh no, actually no, that was Warforged. Sorry, well it's Thunder. It was called Thunderforged. Since now it's called Warforged. Now they've just kept it as the same name since Siege of Orgrimmar. But the idea that you could get a piece of loot or drop on a raid boss that might be a few item levels higher just randomly. But we also got rerolls. Actually, that was right at the start of MOP, wasn't it? In tier 14, the idea you could get coins and you could give if the boss dies, you can roll for a bit of personal loot off it. Again, completely different change there. I'm just trying to think if there was anything else. Towards the end of MOP, of course, we had flexible mode brought in as well. So now you've got 4 different modes of it, blimey. In WoD, again, changed LFR again. Then we have the new. I mean, obviously, changed. All these things changed. We had this sort of. They went back down to in the hard mode version, the set raid size. Again, rather than the 10 and 25 man, just went to 20 man, and as well as the rerolls and as well as the Warforged, we then get missions every couple of weeks from the garrison to begin with, and then the shipyard, where we can get a piece of raid loot appropriate to the level of content that we're raiding. Again, totally different. So in every expansion, there has been something that has changed raiding massively. So it's ludicrous. The actual notion that Legion raiding will be no different is ludicrous. There will be massive changes again. We just don't know what they are because Blizzard haven't mentioned them yet. They may or may not mention them at BlizzCon, because anything they do mention as well at BlizzCon, because it's still quite a way ahead of Legion, could easily change anyway. Whatever is going to be on the beta could easily change. They won't even start doing boss testing until after Christmas, I would have thought. I am hoping they do class balance before boss testing this time at least, though. But yeah, there will be changes. There will be something that changes raids massively in Legion. And quite frankly, what I think is the best thing to do is to identify why the raiding model is as it is now. Identify genuine issues with it, not just, if your argument is, I don't like the raiding model because it's hard. Do you know what I mean? So the arguing for smaller sized mythic raids or flexi mythic raids, which would of course completely take the challenge out of it for the players who are capable of that challenge. You're basically just saying, oh, it's too hard for me. Is it? Dear me. And the other but those players, I just would implore them to think, first of all, if you're in a guild that is never going to achieve what you want to achieve and you think you're capable of achieving more, just move guilds, because you can still stay in. We have so many ways to stay in touch with people we enjoy playing with now. You've got Cross-Realm. Cross-Realm's even coming to Mythic as well. But you've got Cross-Realm things, you've got battle tags. There is now no need for friends to be in the same guild if you want to get different things from the guild. But the other thing is just maybe push your guild a bit more. If you're in this heroic guild and you're wanting to do Mythic and they're going, oh, I ain't got the numbers, there'll be loads of guilds on your server that are in the same boat. One of them surely must be able to complement you with a Mythic roster. The two of you getting together, there must be enough people. I will not believe there isn't. It takes work. It will take planning. It will take effort. But those are the only barriers. The only barriers are in your own head, or in the head of the officers of your guild as necessary. They absolutely are. But yeah, it would be interesting. I would be interested in hearing what people genuinely want from raiding in Legion, because absolutely the only way to approach this, any problems that people perceive exist, is to have a sensible attitude. If you go to Blizzard, and fair play to Blizzard, and you just go to them and whining, oh, well, it's too hard because I want to be able to do the most challenging content, but I just want you to bring that challenge down to my level. Is a bit, You're supposed to raise yourself up to the challenge level, not try and bring it down. You know, think of it as like a high jump. They keep raising the bar and raising the bar. Don't say to them, "Oh, I can't jump that high." Bring it down, but let me have the gold medal anyway. No. But anyway, those are just some thoughts. Minimal suggestions for Legion. I am looking forward to BlizzCon to see if we hear anything on a new raiding model. But the thing is, I know there will be one. We just don't know what it is yet. But I know there will be one because there has been one every single expansion. Why would it change now? Is it perfect now? Of course it's not. It's not necessarily as disastrous as some make out, but it's not perfect now. It can absolutely stand to be improved, but how? How will it need to be improved? And again, I come back to my question I sort of asked in the middle of all that rambling is, do Blizzard change the raiding model to try and meet the needs of the gamers, or are we changing, or the behaviour of a lot of gamers changing because Blizzard changes the raiding model? Because the changes, just to finish off with, you would think are there to increase inclusivity, to get more people raiding. It's all about getting more people raiding. But I was doing a few little calculations. It was all based on bits of information that I can scrape from WoW Progress, of course. It's not very scientific at all. But I don't reckon there's much more than about 12% of the player base do any form of organised raiding. That is normal and above. And I remember doing some calculation. We didn't have WoW Progress at the end of Vanilla, but I remember at the end of Vanilla, as a little exercise, looking at the number of guilds that had killed certain bosses where they got their progress to, across all the servers. I did it for Europe, not other servers around the world. But if the proportions roughly the same, there were probably, I reckoned there were about between 10 and 15% of players, given what I knew about the subscriber count and given what I knew about the number of guilds that were raiding in Vanilla. Again, so I don't think there are any higher proportion of people raiding now than there were in Vanilla when it was the thing you did at Endgame. You either did PvP in an organised sense in a guild, or you did PvE, or you didn't do anything, you were just a casual doing whatever. But if you did PvE, you did raiding. And I just don't think there's a higher proportion now. So it does beg the question, are people made more casual by the fact that there is more content for the casuals, and therefore you lack the impetus to go the extra mile and do the harder thing? Because why would you wipe all night to kill a boss? You can just sign up for a queue and kill straight away. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I'll probably have some more random thoughts next week as we count down to BlizzCon, but until then, I'll see you later.